Thanks.
This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Heart Mojo with Melinda Smith. And Melinda, it's very interesting. Your podcast is about you talking to people, getting through their challenges. And You've gotten through many challenges, but the past 6 months, it's just been piled on top of you.
It sure has. We're managing to work through it because what other choice do we have, right? Got to get through them.
And exactly. And, just to preface this morning, my son called me from Texas and an issue came up and it's like, how am I going to deal with this? And, you should have told me this before I took this job and before I moved. And he was just like, and I was like, okay, like ramble on, you can tell me. And then he just hung up. And then about an hour later, he called and he goes, okay, so I have another obstacle in life. I'm going to get through it. Good. And he gave me some ideas of what he was going to do. And I said, that's wonderful. And that's really what we do on this program, because we can't walk in your shoes, but we can walk alongside of you. And Debbie Griffiths is someone who I met through another great podcaster. And she's been telling her story a lot. And I think it's very important for all of us because some of us deny ourselves the ability to be strong. And Debbie, I don't know how you did it. I started reading your book. I had to put it down for a while because I know it's fiction based, but it was like, this is a little bit too much to handle. But you did. So tell us about you and the book.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to see you, Karen, and nice to meet you, Melinda. I've written a book. It's called Torched, Burnt by a Gaslighter. It's a fictional tale based on true events that actually happened to me. It's regarding the red flags of gaslighting and its subtleties. And my goal for writing the book was really to provide hope to other people that they can leave these types of relationships and successfully rebuild their life. Now, it's taken me a long time to get to that point, to realize that I did it and to give myself credit for it. But, it was actually a magazine article on verbal abuse about 25 years ago in a national women's magazine that I picked up in a grocery store because it had this wonderful looking recipe on it. And I thought I would try the recipe, only to find out a few days later I had a few extra minutes, read the article on the verbal abuse, and it woke me up to thinking, oh, maybe, no, maybe. And it started putting a whole chain of events into motion. And so my hope is, if it was a magazine article that woke me up to the fact that, this marriage isn't what it really should be or what I had hoped to be, then maybe my book can help other people see some of these red flags and the subtleties, because you're not gaslighted every day of the week. It comes and goes and comes and goes. Mm-hmm. And, just to give them hope that they can leave these relationships and you can rebuild your life.
Well, and I think it's important to talk about the verbal abuse because I think we all remember the burning bed.
Yes.
And that brought a lot to light. I mean, I think women lived in a life where they just didn't talk about it, but that movie made all the difference for a lot of women. And that was more of a violent, physical violent situation. But what you're talking about is more subtle things that happen to you every day.
It's a lot more subtle. It's a psychological manipulation, from the abuser to the victim. And it's over a period of time, and the victim ends up losing your sense of reality. You question your memories, you question everything about you. You totally lose your self-esteem. And for me, it was so bad that it drove me to attempt suicide. I just did not want to be around all this anymore.
So
you're
what were
prison.
what were some of these subtleties? Because I was also in a verbal abusive marriage. And to this day, I mean, we've worked through a lot of that. We're not together anymore, but he honestly does not even remember the things that he did. And I can believe that from the way he has turned out. But share with us some of those verbal things that some people would say, oh, it's nothing, Debbie, don't worry about it.
Yeah, and for me, the biggest red flag that I see now looking back was isolation. I initially didn't think too much of it. We moved from California to Georgia, where his family was. So it ended up putting me 3,000 miles away geographically, but I really wasn't allowed to really call my mom. This was back in the day when, the rotary dials or the push buttons, and the cheaper race was to call after 7 p.m. And so I really was only maybe allowed to call once a week or every other week, something to that nature. And it really wasn't a quick call because I did not know how he would react. And that went back right after we were married. I think we might not have been married a month. And we had a small earthquake in California, shocking. But I don't like them, even being a native Californian. I will never get used to them. And I got scared, and because he was away at work, and these are the days with no cell phones, no easy way to get a hold of anybody. But I called my mom to see how if they felt it, just to kind of calm down. And he happened to come home while I was on the phone, and he kind of murmured like, "Who you on the phone with?" Or lip synced it basically. And I said, my mom, and he motioned for me to get off the phone. So I quickly ended the conversation, and he blew up at me saying, "You never reach out to your family. I'm the one here. I'm the one, that you need to rely on." And it was like, I reminded him that he, was at work. I had no way of getting a hold of him. And that's when he hit me. And I was shocked. And not only did he hit me, did he put a hole in the wall. Now,
Wow.
a few days later, my sister happened to come over for something, sees the hole in the wall, and she's looking at me, and I just I did not want to admit that I might have made a mistake. So I lied. And I said, "Oh, we were moving something and it hit the wall, and it's drywall. So it was easy to make a hole in the wall." So I said I lied to her. I felt bad about doing that, but I just really did not want to admit to making a mistake. I was 19 years old, and being a Catholic, divorce was not in the option. It was just not in the vocabulary, not an option. And thought maybe this was a one-off because he immediately apologized. Did all the things that you hear, that you read about when
Right.
The perpetrators, what they do. And so I tried to I believed them, and go on our merry way. So there's a lot of things that you're told, or you say something, or you do something, or I wasn't allowed to wear certain things. I wasn't allowed to wear nail polish. Could only wear my hair a certain way, did not want it short, wanted it long, all of these different things. And so you get to a point after years of it, questioning yourself, do I say anything? Do I do anything? Because you're walking on eggshells. You never know what's gonna set them off.
Set them off.
Right. Absolutely.
I grew up in a family with that. Well, my mother was lucky enough to get out by the time I was about 7 or 8 years old. But my father was not only mentally abusive, he was physically abusive. And he threw a knife at her. He had guns.
Oh,
So we were lucky to get out when we did. And ultimately, he abused a woman one too many times and she killed him.
oh no.
Wow.
Okay.
So you never know, it can come back. I mean, he pushed her too far. Now, my mother was lucky enough to be able to get us out, get him out. My grandparents helped her. So she at least had the wherewithal. And she was young too. I mean, I think she was 28 years old.
Yeah, that's young.
Yeah.
It's tough. They say on average it takes a woman 7 attempts to leave one of these types of relationships before they're successful. Because it's really hard because the abuser has a way of saying the right things, oh, I won't do this anymore. I'm so sorry. I need you. I can't live without you. Some of the love bombing techniques that they play. And so it makes it hard, or they threaten, like, you'll never see your kids. I will take them away from you. You'll never make it. In fact, for me, when I left my ex, his parting words to me were, you will never make it and no one will ever love you. Now, by that point, that was the wrong thing to say to me, because
You
it
didn't want
actually
anybody.
drove me. Yeah, it drove me to just like, no, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I did. Because at that point I was determined, because I had attempted suicide, and I made the decision when I was in the psych wards, like, okay, this has got to change. I can't do this, and what am I showing my kids?
Right. It shows them it's okay to be spoken to that way. Did you have boys or girls or both?
I have 2 boys and a girl, and my daughter's the youngest, and she's the only one that has married at this point in time.
It can teach the boys how to treat women and teach the girls what's acceptable, because if daddy did it, then it must be okay.
Yeah, and that's when I realized, like, no, I can't. I don't want that for them. I don't want that for them. I don't want them to learn, ways of being abused, nor did I want them to learn to victimize others.
Right.
So
How
I
old were
felt
they
like
when you left?
my oldest one was 14, and okay, and then there was a 9-year-old, and Megan was about 6 at that time, 5 or 6. Yeah, she was young.
Yeah.
But the boys were just old enough to be able to witness what was going on.
My oldest one especially, and it's taken him the longest to kind of heal from that.
Did they
So,
need to go to therapy to help deal with what they observed and how it impacted them?
Well, during the divorce, because my oldest one was 14, and in the state of Georgia, he could decide which parent to reside with. He chose his dad. And I knew he would, because he was my ex's favorite child. And so for many years, we were alienated, somewhat alienated. After he turned 18 and moved away to college, then that's when I moved back to California, where my family support was. And once I got to California, yes, I started finding a therapist, right away. We were all in like family counseling, to heal.
Right. Absolutely.
It's interesting that when you talk about your oldest son living with it, deciding with his dad, when I had custody of my son, but when he was 11, his father said to him, in the state of Ohio, you just have to go in front of the judge and say, I want to live with my dad rather than my mom, and no questions are asked. And he was visiting his father for the summer. His dad took him to the courthouse. And then I got a phone call saying he's going to come home for a week to get his stuff, and then he's coming back. And it was like, well, I don't get this.
Yeah.
And I remember contacting an attorney and asking, and the attorney said, it's how the family courts are. They just, some states it's 11, some it's 13. And I will tell you about being alienated for the first 2 years. I sort of got to see him, but there was always an excuse. And then I went for 2 years, didn't see him, and he didn't call. And then all of a sudden my son said, hey, I want to see my mom. And all of a sudden things, somewhat turned around, but it didn't turn around until he became a young adult. So I understand. So what made you write the book as a fiction rather than, hey, this is what happened to me?
Number one, I didn't think anybody would really be interested in it. It was more like an autobiography or a biography. And it was also a way to distance myself. And as I started writing it, and somebody else mentioned something, she goes, this is almost sounds like a younger and older version of you. And I, looked back and I went, yeah, you're right, because the one character was about the age when I was making some of my major decisions about the marriage. And I think for the older character, it would have been somebody I would have liked to have mentored me through it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I guess subconsciously I did that. But it was also another way for me to test myself to see how far I really have come with moving past all of that trauma.
I think it was also cathartic, right? It was a way to
Yeah.
put it out there, and it didn't have to be totally personal, even though now you've come out and people will know that there's a personal piece to it. I think it's easier to tell somebody else's story than our own.
Yes.
So
yes. And
it's
it was
interesting.
like
Before this, go ahead.
I was just going to say,
go ahead.
I think I had to distance myself, really more like truly it's, sometimes I look back and I'm like, did that really happen? And it's like, yeah, I did get through that. And I don't stop and give myself enough credit because I'm just one of, it's like, okay, this is what I got to deal with. Let's figure it out. Just put the plan in place and move forward. I don't really look back in the rearview mirror. I try to go forward. So writing the book in a way is cathartic, and it forced myself to look back in the rearview mirror and give myself some credit where I'm not really good at doing, and say, you know what, you're stronger than you ever gave yourself credit for.
It's interesting that before we got on for this podcast, how things pop up in your social media. Something popped up about narcissism.
Yes.
And how abusers are narcissistic individuals, and how when you try to work, you end up, there's something in you that allows that person to come in and take hold of your life. And the only way to truly make a change is for you to make the change, because they're not going to change. Most likely they won't change. We can never say never, right? But most likely. And that's very challenging, to have to really look inside and look at you and say, hey, why do I keep pulling this into my life? Whether it was for your marriage or whether it was another relationship after that, because women do tend, or people, because it can happen to men as well, perpetuate and bring somebody else, maybe a little different, but still some of the same characteristics of abuse.
Yes.
So I thought it was interesting to pop up today for this conversation.
Yes. And those are some of the things that I've had to learn about myself. Drawing the boundaries, that it's okay to have boundaries. Again, my faith taught me, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, or, love others, like you would love yourself. Well, for some reason, the loving myself part got misconstrued or put aside, or I never gave myself permission that it's okay to love myself. It's okay to take care of myself. And I have a health coach, and she recently told me, she said, if you don't put yourself first, especially in your health, you can't take care of others. You have to take care of yourself first. And it's like, I needed that. So, working on oneself is an ongoing process, and that's okay. And the key is to be open to it, and make change is hard. Change is really hard.
Well, and many
but it
of
can
us,
be really good.
And thinking about it, when you were growing up, okay, at least when I was growing up, I was always told, how doing something for somebody else is your job in life. You're a female. And I remember my grandmother's advice on my wedding day was never go to sleep mad at him. And I said to her, why? And she said, because men have a different reality when it comes to anger.
Mm.
And, she scared me. I mean,
Yeah.
my parents were the most loving parents. Yes, they had loud conversations, but then they would hug and kiss and say, and you knew it was better.
Yeah.
But in my marriage, those voices got loud. And then he would tell me if I didn't listen, he could have me locked up because he's my husband. And I believed it. And even when I shared it with my parents said, oh, he's crazy. But I didn't accept that because here's my husband. Yeah.
But Karen, even into, I think, the 60s, early 70s, a lot of women in a lot of states couldn't have a bank account.
Well, that's
unless
true.
their father signed the bank account or their husband signed the bank account.
Right.
So there really was a piece of truth to that men had the power and they could do as they pleased in that situation. So you can see where she came from for that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and then my divorce happened like in the mid 1990s, and because I didn't work, I had 1 year of college. It's like, well, what do I do? How do I get a job? Who would hire me? I've got kids. Who's going to hire me? And I realized I had more administrative skills than again, something I didn't give myself enough credit for, and started off there, and then ended up in the property management field, where for the last 20 something years, I've been in the homeowners association industry. So it's been a very good career for me. It certainly helped me raise my kids. And, I learned to move up and manage different types of communities and earn different certifications. And I put myself back through college and to earn a degree. And, so things are possible. You just got to kind of sometimes buckle down and not tell yourself you can't, but you need to tell yourself I can, and take a piece of paper and a pencil and say, okay, this is what I can do now. This is what let's top it off and, make small goals and take those baby steps.
Absolutely.
Did you have voices in your head coming from previous family members that said, oh, you shouldn't? So for me, I'll give you an example. I love my grandparents dearly. I don't know what we would have done without them when my mother got separated and divorced. However, my grandmother had this little phrase, and it was self-praise stinks. She'd go, self-praise stinks. So like if I did something in school and I go, look, I got an A, or look, this was good, she'd go, self-praise stinks. I hear that to this day, and I am not a spring chicken. I still hear that when I want to say, hey, I did a good job on that, right? Or I can do this, or I can move forward. And I'm not quite sure where that came from. I mean, she would have been like 114 now or some crazy number like that. But do you have those voices that came from maybe a family member that put you into this situation that you know of?
No, but I know, going back, I've always had these perfectionistic tendencies, and I always try to excel, maybe overachieve, kind of being, I probably am my own worst enemy when it came to that. And again, I think it was going back to, wanting the praise and stuff from my mom and dad. And it's not like they didn't give it to me, because they did, but for some reason, maybe it wasn't enough, or it wasn't what I needed as far as the terms of, praise. And I love the book, The Five Love Languages, because there's so much to that about how to actually communicate what that person needs. But they didn't have that book, when I was growing up. So there's, we all do the best that we can in those situations.
You can only do what you can do.
And I think for me, my own mindset is my own internal thoughts can be my own worst enemy.
Were you the oldest?
Yes.
Are you the oldest? Yeah.
Yes.
Me too.
Yeah. I have a younger sister. She's 3 years younger. So yes, I'm the oldest. So I felt like I was always paving the way. And
I was always the responsible one. So when my mother was divorced, she had to get a job, right? She was working. And so my brother, I have a sister, but she's a lot younger, second marriage from my mom, was me. Like I had to watch out for him, even though we were only 22 months apart. I made sure his lunch made it to school. I made sure his gloves weren't left at home. And he knew it. He would tell, don't worry, Annie's got it. That was his nickname for me.
Uh-huh.
So I took on that responsibility, and I still do today, no matter what it is, and in every job I have. I'm
Yeah.
always, well, somebody's got to do it, so I'll do it. And it's not always to my best interest, health-wise, even though I know they need the help. It's just not in my best interest all the time, but it's hard. It's hard to say no.
Well,
It
luckily
is.
we're in an era right now where women are sharing and speaking out and learning that, yes, they have a voice. I just went through a session this summer called Positive Intelligence.
Mm.
And the 6 weeks of the course, I'm going to be honest, and I've told the leader of the course, I did not follow it exactly the way I was supposed to or the way it was designed. I picked out pieces that I could tell I needed to work on. We've been in a 6-month group now discussing it. And I admit too that sometimes I don't do the pre-work for our discussions. But what it has taught me is what you're talking about, Debbie, that if you take that first step, there's joy about, hey, I can do this. And you may not go outside and tell everybody, hey, I did this. But personally, you have to tap yourself on the shoulder and say, I took that step. And if you take 2 steps back, think about everything that you've learned and keep going. And it's not easy. And Melinda, those voices, they're always going to be there because it's part of who we are. But we have to start telling those voices we don't want to listen. Right. And that's not easy, but it takes time. And at least for me, there are certain voices that I hear, and especially from my ex, and I put it on my husband. And it's so sad because we've been together 39 years. Most people would have said, why? But it's deep inside of me.
Right.
And I think that's some of the side effects of trauma. And I probably didn't even realize that what I went through was trauma. Nobody really has ever talked about it again until I started writing the book and started doing some research. It was never called gaslighting. Back then it was verbal abuse, and they didn't even really liken it to domestic violence. And so we've come a long way with defining things, good and bad. Everything can be taken out of perspective, but it does exist. And people are not really sure if it's a one-off thing where somebody might say something and you'll question them. It's like, oh, I was just joking. If it's a one-off and they intentionally not repeat that, then I would not say you were being gaslighted. But if they continue to do it and it's like, oh, it's just a joke, I don't mean it that way, and they continue to do it despite you saying something, then yes, you need to take a step back and realize this is what's going on. And it needs to stop. And if you can get the therapy, a couples therapy to work it out, great. I'm not still to this day, I'm still a proponent for marriage and not for divorce, but I understand why divorce happens. I mean, heck, they wrote about it in the Old Testament, right? But just get the help that you need and understand maybe why you are allowing this or why you're staying in this relationship where this is continuing and it's not stopping. And understand your own boundaries, because that was a big thing for me. And I'm a people pleaser, and there's a limit when you continue to please others. At some point in time, there's nothing left of you.
You got it. Absolutely.
Just nothing left.
Can you give our listeners a little idea of the types of things gaslighters do? So you mentioned about maybe, doing an insult, a joke, and then, it's nothing. But what other things can you let them know that maybe that's going to be a piece that's in their life?
Well, again, the isolation, and it can be very subtle. But in other words, if you're not really have a lot of friends outside the marriage, really not, working. They tell you things like, well, maybe you shouldn't talk to that person. I don't think they have our best interest at hand. Isolate you from your family. That's a key one. Another other things of, like I was just saying, they can say something and they'll respond, "Oh, it's a joke," or I didn't say it like that. Um, they can play around with your memories, like you they can tell you something that happened, and it's like, no, no, it didn't happen that way at all.
Mm-hmm.
And probably one of the best examples of gaslighting and love bombing in action is an old 1944 movie called Gaslight, and it's with Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer. And he, initially love bombs Ingrid Bergman into marriage, and then as soon as they get married, he starts telling her that she's forgetting something or misplacing things. And then it gets worse to where the movie takes place at the turn of the century when they have the old-fashioned gas lights to light the inside of your homes.
Mm-hmm.
So he's constantly turning up and down the gas so that the room gets lighter and darker ever so subtly. And so she sees it, she questions it, but the staff and even Boyer himself says, no, no, you're imagining these things. So it kept escalating to the point where she thinks she's losing her mind. And then we find out, well, there was an ulterior motive for why he was
Mm-hmm.
gaslighting her. But it really shows the love bombing and the gaslighting in action.
Is that where the term came from?
Actually started from a play called Gaslight, and the movie was made from the play. Yeah.
I wondered where the term actually came from.
Yeah,
That's
we really,
interesting.
right, and we didn't really hear about it for many,
Mm.
many years until, more recently. And then in 2022, gaslight or gaslighting became the most researched word in the Merriam-Webster dictionary.
In
And now,
2022.
2022, yeah.
I wonder if it's because people were stuck home together for 2 years with COVID before they actually started getting out in the world.
Probably.
It
I
could
think,
be, and I know that there was a lot of concern that the incidence of domestic violence would increase with all of the isolation, and
and
I
it
think
did, and
Yeah.
it
it
did.
did. Yeah,
And I think people also need to understand you don't have to be married for this to happen. All you have to do
correct.
is be in a relationship.
Primarily concerns impacts uh, intimate partner relationships where man and woman, or man and man, women women, are you can see it from a parent to a child, and an example of that is Disney's movie Tangled. You can see that in action. Um, I know the term is used a lot in politics, and I don't really want to go down that road. But primarily, you see it in intimate partner relationships. That's
Mm-hmm.
where domestic violence occurs.
So
Yeah.
beyond your book, how else do you reach out to talk about your story and abuse?
I
You
am
have a
looking to.
you have a podcast, right?
I've been doing podcasts. Yes, I do a lot of stuff on social media. And I've also was at an event about a month ago. It was out in the desert, Coachella Valley. I partner with the Colson Cooley Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Where
I saw that.
50% of my book sale profits are being donated to the foundation. Nicole was brutally murdered at the hands of her boyfriend
Mm-hmm.
through domestic violence. She was murdered with a claw hammer. He hit her 13 times while she was sleeping. She
And
was
she
only
already
20.
had a broken leg, right? Wasn't she
Yes,
stuck in
yes,
bed?
yes. And she was 25 years old in the prime of
Yeah.
her life. So
There's a
so we
petition. There's a petition to
yes,
keep her abuser in prison, which I've already signed, by the way. So
thank
I
you.
encourage everybody to go find that and sign it.
Yes, yes, you can actually find it on my website. I have a link to that petition, and my website is www.broken2boldness.com. And yes, her story is on there along with the link to that petition. So yes, they're trying to keep the murderer in jail. He's up for parole again in May
May.
2023.
I
Yeah.
saw that.
Wow.
How did you come up with the name Broken to Boldness? I love that.
You know, when I was working with my publisher to come up with some taglines, I was, doodling all kinds of names, right? And it kind of came together. And I really loved it. It resonates with me because I was broken. You know, when you're at the point of doing a suicide attempt and waking up in a psych ward, you can't get any lower than that. And it's taken me a long time, but now I have a voice and I'm trying to be bold with it. So,
And you are. You're
thank
definitely
you.
using it.
So I have a question. So you attempted suicide. You were still married at the time.
Yes.
Did he call for medical help? Who called for medical help that got you into the hospital?
Interesting story. He worked a lot downstairs in his basement. And I think if I recall, the kids had, they were down, or maybe not the oldest one, but the other ones were in bed. And I swallowed some pills, and which is very unusual for me because I don't like to swallow pills. But anyway, I did. I did not leave a note. And apparently, it was several hours later when he realized that there was something wrong. He had come upstairs, finally realized something wrong. I think he drove me to the hospital. I don't recall any of that. There was no ambulance call that I can recall. And they could not pump my stomach because too much time had elapsed.
Mm.
So, in essence, I was alone for several hours before it was even realized what I had done.
Interesting. So there was something in him that he knew that he had to get you at least some help so that it maybe wouldn't be pointed towards him.
Yes.
Well, and also he didn't call an ambulance. An ambulance
Right.
would have brought attention to the house, to
Right.
everything that was going on.
To the neighbors. Oh yeah.
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 Right.
To the neighbors. Yeah. Yeah. So that was another, what do you want to say, icing on the cake,
Yep.
to make the decision, that I did. Yeah, there at the end of the day, that's not love. And that was one of the things that I think that's what held me back for the words, no one will ever love you. Those have held me back from time to time. And when I wrote the book, it really hit hard home for me. It's like, that's not love.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I don't want any part of that. I don't want that.
So how did you actually leave? Because I think for anybody in that situation, all these things happen and you might have had your last straw, but you still had to pack some stuff, take your children, get out the door. How did you
Yes.
do that?
So my mom and sister, my ex actually called, to my surprise, my mom and sister, and told them what had happened. They flew out. They saw me in the hospital, and I told them some things because they did not know the whole story. In fact, they didn't know the whole story until after I wrote the book. And they understood. They said, yes, you need, this isn't right. We know there's something that's been wrong for a while. We just couldn't put our fingers on it. We thought he was just way too controlling. And so we had a discussion. I had that discussion with my ex, and he actually he wanted to try couples counseling. We did for a little bit, and I by that time I knew it wasn't going to work because he went from one end of the specular to the other.
Right.
Now all of a sudden he was just like a love bomb. He's like way too much. Like, well, look at all I'm doing for you. It's like, but it's too much. You're in my face way too much. I need to
Space.
find the right. I'm still trying to heal from the depression. I was extremely depressed, trying to heal that and trying to see if I can, salvage a marriage and at the same time. But it couldn't. And as far as that goes, I mean, I was able to find a place. I packed up, some things, but he ended up changing the locks during one of the trips out of there. He pretended to be nice, and he was nice for to a point, and then whatever, had enough, changed the locks. I remember calling the sheriff, and they came and they said, there's nothing we can do. So I said, but I have a divorce decree. All right, there's nothing we can do.
Wow.
So it's like, okay, I'm going to take what I have and make the
Move
best
on.
of it.
Absolutely. Well, there are a lot of people out there who need to hear the story, need to hear your words, because they're dealing with it right now and they think that they can't get out. As we all know, that everybody's situation is different. Right. It may be more difficult than others, but you've got to let somebody know, and you got to get as far away as possible.
Absolutely. And anybody that thinks they might be in a situation like this, or might know someone who's in a situation like this, the best resource is the National Domestic Violence Awareness Hotline. And that number is 1-800-799-SAFE, SAFE. So if you, go someplace, where it's quiet, where you can reach out to them. I think they're there 24/7. So there's hope. There's help, and there's hope.
We'll put that all in the show notes. We'll put your information in the show notes as usual. I suggest everybody go out and buy the book. It's fiction, but it's real. And as I told Debbie when I first started reading it, I've had to put it down numerous times because just too much of a reflection. And I don't want to get caught up in the past. I want to stay in the present.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it could be triggers for somebody reading it if they've gone through something like that. And I get it. I totally get it.
Well, we really appreciate you being on. I know it's a big challenge for a lot of women in particular, but men as well who are in that situation. Yes. And maybe even children who are in a situation and need help to get out. So your words are very inspiring, and it's an important topic, and you let them know there's hope. You can get through that challenge. There's always hope.
There's always hope. And that's my motto. There's always hope. So, but thank you so much for the afternoon, or for the chat today. I really appreciate your time this afternoon, and great meeting you, Melinda.
You as well. Maybe we'll meet again. You never know.
Absolutely.
Might have a part B.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.